According to F. Scott Fitzgerald, by the 1920s, all gods were dead, all wars were fought, and all faiths shaken. The post-war world was going to be different, and how. But front row center on the American political stage were two new laws that threatened the future of the big transatlantic liners. A bill called the Emergency Quota Act finally pulled down the curtain on unrestricted immigration to the United States, and prohibition outlawed the manufacturing and sale of alcohol across the country.
That meant American liners could not offer one of the most wonderful aspects of an ocean voyage, the long bars, you know, that little nip in the morning and the little nip after lunch and the brandies and all that kind of stuff. So the foreign lines really were able to capitalize on this.
To break the alcoholic embargo, some American lines registered their ships elsewhere and capitalized on the public's thirst by offering booze cruises to nowhere. Then, a number of enterprising passenger agents came up with a novel idea at the same time: tourism. Aimed at middle-class Americans, particularly the adventurous set, smaller ships would set sail to some exotic destination and back, for no other purpose than to have a good time. Until the 1920s, there was no better place to see the class system at work than on an ocean liner. But now, the age of mass tourism was here, and ship life became a democracy of romance and pleasure where no one was better than anyone else. The grand experiment would have a revolutionary outcome: the one-class ship. According to a New York Times critic, the new trend spelled the end of the class system on the high seas. It was an overreaction, but even the large and conservative British lines, Cunard and White Star, were forced by economic necessity to change with the times. The dramatic drop in immigration to America saw steerage and third-class quarters dropped from most ships and improved to tourist class or tourist cabin. Cheap tickets to Europe attracted a growing number of ordinary middle-class Americans, teachers, students, and office workers. For some, it was a chance to visit the historic sites of the old world. For others, it was the nightlife they'd heard so much about from the doughboys when on leave in Paris. Despite the growth in tourism, many of the superliners were still far less profitable than in the days of mass immigration to America. Built pre-war, they were now becoming expensive to run and maintain. All the lines operating on the North Atlantic were forced to rethink their strategy. Both White Star and Cunard decided to rebuild their fleets with more modest-sized ships. At 20,000 rather than 60,000 tons, they would be easier to fill and far more economic to run. The German lines were also rebuilding their fleets with smaller vessels. With ships like the 20,000-ton Albert Ballon, Hamburg America was on its way to becoming the largest and most profitable line of the decade. But in 1927, just as the days of the large, high-speed luxury liner appeared to be numbered, the French line launched a stunning new flagship, the Île-de-France. At over 43,000 tons, she was the largest ship built since the war. The Île-de-France was to bring a new era for the superliner, not for her size or speed, but for her revolutionary interior design. Her designers had created a modern, luxurious, and unique ocean liner style that would take the world by storm.
Decoratively, prior to the First World War, the liners were copying landside establishments. manor houses, castles, even Moorish, Arabian, Egyptian concoctions. And then suddenly, in 1927, comes a liner that breaks away from it completely, the beginning of Art Deco on the high seas.
Coming decade, the Ile-de-France would carry more first-class passengers than any ship afloat. It was primarily Americans who fell under her spell, from movie stars to intellectuals, and a new breed of class-conscious American businessmen cashed in their stocks for a first-class ticket to France, just to be seen in the presence of Europe's social elite.
It was like walking into the fanciest hotel you'd ever been in your life. I can remember coming on deck and seeing as far as the eye could see on this boat deck. All the ship's stewards lined out there with their little pillboxes hats on, their red and blue jackets, standing inspection like they were the Royal Marines. And they had to pass that inspection. Anybody who didn't have his hair cut, his gloves were dirty, his pants weren't creased, or there wasn't a shine on his shoes, he was immediately sent down below.
The Ile-de-France was a floating showcase of the best of everything French. A boulevard at sea, a destination in itself. In John Brennan's classic, The Sway of the Grand Saloon, he wrote, "In those years to come, evenings on the Ile-de-France may be remembered for everything and anything, except that they were spent in the middle of the ocean." The ocean was as incidental as the street that runs by a hotel. The ship, as a place, had become a reality. Ocean voyage was fast becoming a luxury in which fewer and fewer people could indulge. Economic recession would soon turn to depression with the Wall Street crash. The future of passenger lines was threatened as never before. During this period, a new wave of nationalism was sweeping across Europe. And like the heady pre-war days, rival nations still coveted the prestige of owning one of the world's finest ocean liners as a symbol of their maritime might. In 1928, Edna Mussolini, daughter of the Italian dictator, launched the largest Italian liner built to date. At more than 32,000 tons, the Augustus was the largest diesel-powered liner of her time. Then, in 1929, it was Germany that sparked a new superliner race with two 50,000-ton giants, Bremen and Europa.
They were intended to be, from the very beginning, the greatest ships in the world. They introduced streamlining to ocean liners. And the superstructure forward was streamlined, it was rounded. Instead of great, tall, thin stacks like on our older vessels, they had very low stacks which were much too low. They had to be raised later on.
Both Bremen and Europa slashed days off the Mauritania's transatlantic record set 2 decades earlier. No longer humbled by war, Germany was back in the superliner business, and Britain had lost the blue ribbon to her greatest maritime rival once again. But the British, in the form of Cunard, would not give up the race. In the late 20s, the line approached Glasgow shipbuilders John Brown to design 2 express liners for a new weekly service from Southampton to New York.
The chairman at that time was adamant that there was no notion of building either the biggest ship or the fastest ship. All he wanted was a ship that would satisfy this requirement for a 2-ship service.
despite Cunard's proposal, the shipbuilders soon realized that to achieve a weekly schedule with only 2 vessels, the liners would need to be bigger and faster than ever before. These liners would have to be giants. In late December 1930, construction began on the first of the yet unnamed vessels. Hull 534, as she was known, captured the imagination of the British people. At 80,000 tons, she was to be the largest ship ever built, and certainly the fastest. But at the same time, across the English Channel, the French were building a liner of almost equal size and potential speed, the Normandy. She would hopefully follow in the wake of the stunning success of the Île-de-France. The French and the British were now locked in an extraordinary race to be the first to challenge their German rivals for the blue ribbon of the Atlantic. 12 months later, Britain's worsening economy forced Cunard to halt construction of their ship. Over 3,500 men were laid off. And Hull 534, 80% complete, was left to rust. Britain was out of the race. Italian shipping lines were also facing ruin. But in 1932, Benito Mussolini stepped in and forced the merger of his country's 3 largest lines to form the megalithic Italia line. Within the first year, Italia would launch 2 brilliant superliners into transatlantic service. The first, the 50,000-ton Rex. She was a greyhound. Her designers were far more concerned with mechanics than luxurious interiors. Averaging 28 knots across the Atlantic, Rex beat out her German competitor's best time to New York by almost 4 hours. She became the first Italian liner to win the coveted blue ribbon of the Atlantic. Her running mate, Conte di Savoia, was fast but not a record breaker. She was fitted with stabilizing systems in a failed effort to combat the eternal problem of seasickness. Then, in late October 1932, the French delivered to an expectant world their most dazzling creation, Normandy. Rather than her stalled Cunard competitor, Normandy would acquire the mantle as the first 80,000-ton liner. And at over 1,000 feet in length, she was the longest ever constructed. Underwritten by the French government, Normandy was designed to impress upon the world that France was recovering from the tough economic times. But Normandy was far more than a show pony. She was to influence ocean liner design for decades to come. Her dramatic clipper-like bow and clean, sweeping superstructure left her contemporaries looking staid and cluttered by comparison.
She's quintessentially, I think, the ocean liner. She was fast, she was smart, she was chic. Her interiors were extraordinary, the best that French art and artists could devise. And she was just exquisite.
Ship enthusiasts would agree that that perhaps might have been the most beautiful ship, inside and out. It was truly the ship of state. You can see that it was just more than trying to build a nice ship for passengers. This was France, and they were proud of it, and, well, they should have been proud of it.
In 1934, after 2 lost years, the British government forced the merger of Cunard and White Star and provided the much-needed finance for work to begin again on Hull 534.
Just look at the giant 534 and see some of the things that make her the wonder ship of the age. She represents the supreme triumph of marine architecture and engineering. The Houses of Parliament will be completely hidden were it possible to put this monster liner in front of them.
The interest was fantastic. They talk about her, you know, there was some sort of miracle, the coming of the Lord or something like that. Because it was sort of the sign of the end of the Depression.
In less than 6 months, an army of workers brought back to life the greatest British engineering triumph of its time. A triumph whose name would forever be synonymous with ocean travel.
I am happy to name this ship the Queen Mary.
At the time of her launch, the Queen Mary was at least a year behind her French rival, Normandy. Already, the German and Italian ships had left Britain in their wake, and no one had any doubt France had its sights on the blue ribbon of the Atlantic. When the Queen Mary took to the water, no British ship in history seemed so important to reviving the nation's prestige. A duel was about to begin. A duel between the 2 biggest ships the world had ever seen.
When a sister becomes a surrogate mother, is she the aunt or the mom? We'll answer that question and show you what it takes to land on an aircraft carrier on How'd They Do That, next from TLC.